So by way of brief introduction, let me just say that Dr. Edwin Fulner is founder and current president of the Heritage Foundation. He also serves as chairman of our Asian Studies Center Advisory Council. I think it's fair to say that Ed's bio and the history of this organization, he ran for nearly 40 years, are almost synonymous. And one of the proudest accomplishments of this joint bio, in my opinion, is the establishment of the Asian Studies Center. A little more than 30 years ago, Dr. Fulner banked on the judgment that one day America's relationship with Asia would be as important, if not more important, than the relationship with Europe. Today, not only is that true, I would say, but the relationships are intertwined in many ways. And so it's actually impossible to ignore one at the expense of the other. And so Heritage focuses on both our relationship with Europe, but also our relationship with Asia and many other places in the world. And true to Ed's vision, we cover the whole range of policy issues, domestic and foreign besides. Ed has been more than a boss to me, more from him about Asia than any place else I've been. So with that, let me invite Ed to the stage, and he'll start us off.
Thanks very much, Walter. It's a very great pleasure for me, on behalf of all of us on the Board of Trustees and the staff of the Heritage Foundation, to welcome everyone here today to this very important and I think timely conference on China's emerging role in the world in U.S.-China relations. We just had a breakfast opportunity to exchange views with our Chinese guests, as well as some of the other American panelists from other organizations around Washington and around the country. It was a very lively discussion about new forms of economic interpretation, about what we learn building on lessons from the past. So it's going to be a very interesting day and a very interesting program, I know. I particularly appreciate our guests from China being here with us. It's a pleasure to welcome such a distinguished group of outstanding scholars, and we thank them all for being here. Similarly, for our American friends, we see you much more, but we're always glad to have you here, too. Doctors Dorn, Zweigel, Green, and Finkelstein, thank you very much for being with us. And Jim and I have shared many podiums together over several decades, and it's great to always have friends from our neighboring institutions like CNA and Cato and others here with us. But I particularly want to thank PHU, Dr. Yu, for his partnership in this endeavor, which has made this a continuing kind of journey of discovery for all of us. The idea of this program started many years ago when I was president of the Heritage Foundation, the first time. But Walter and I and our colleague Ken Sheffer were visiting Guizhou at the suggestion of State Councilor Dai Bingguo. Dai Bingguo and I have had an intense relationship for several decades now, often jousting over the importance of ideas and learning from each other in our different perspectives. On one of our drives around town, we discussed the idea of Heritage doing a program on U.S.-China relations that would air our differences, very candidly. And at that point, we were thinking only really about economic issues, about how a country develops. But we thought it would be a nice way, a nice facet to our Chinese work under the leadership of Dean Chung, Walter, of course, directing our overall Asian Studies Center. And it would allow us a venue to present our free market philosophy to Chinese policymakers and the public. But there I was over breakfast this morning listening to our Chinese guests talking to me about Friedrich von Hayek, which is very encouraging to those of us who believe in the free market and who, in our particular case, were honored to have Professor Hayek as a distinguished visiting fellow on several occasions when he came to Washington. Now, I don't know why we couldn't find, now I know why, but we couldn't find a Chinese partner. And we tried to convince several of them. There were no takers, so we put the whole project on the back burner, and there it stayed for better than a decade. Then we had the opportunity to tell PHU about the idea. He saw the value of it immediately. He connected us with our friends at Peking University, and here we are today. We added politics since we're so close to the upcoming Party Congress, and we're doing it in Washington, not in Beijing as originally planned. We hope to have a follow-up discussion in Beijing in the not-too-distant future. The U.S. and China have differences across a range of issues, and at Heritage, we've made no secret about these differences. We study them, we publish about them, and on many visits to Beijing and encounters with our Chinese friends here in Washington and elsewhere in the United States, we talk about them openly. It's very important that we stay engaged. The United States government, but also Heritage and American conservatives generally must stay engaged. We may not always find compromises. In fact, we're not necessarily looking for compromises. But for the peace and prosperity of the Pacific, indeed of the whole world, it's important to hear each other out and to find out precisely where those differences might be. This is the spirit I envision for today's discussion and this program going forward. Let us hear each other out. It's that simple. Again, I say welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Okay, well, as I said, in keeping with the idea here of keeping introductions short, we're going to start out with remarks from Dr. Justin Lin, Director of the Center for New Structural Economics at Peking University, and former Chief Economist and Senior Vice President at the World Bank. Justin, you're welcome to sit here or take the podium, however you'd like to proceed.
The podium.
Okay.
Good morning. It's an honor to come to the Heritage Foundation and to share with you some of my ideas about China, and especially deglobalization with Chinese characteristics. And I'll explain why China has been so successful in the globalization process. And I also like to mention the Free Trade Zone initiative and the One Belt, One Road initiative in China, and what are the rationales behind those initiatives. As you know, that China started the transition from a socialist planning economy to a market economy in 1979. At that time, China was one of the poorest countries in the world because its per capita GDP was 155 compared to 550 on the average in sub-Saharan African countries. And China was also an inward-looking country because in 1979, the export plus import as a percentage of GDP in China was only 9.5%. That means 91% of the production in China had nothing to do with the global economy. But since 1979 to last year, the average annual growth rate was 9.6%. We did not observe any country to grow at such a high rate for such a long time. And the trade growth rate on average was 15.4% per year for 37 years. So as a result, China now is a high middle income country with a per capita GDP of 8,100 last year. And trade as a percentage of GDP was around 50% of GDP. The highest ratio among all the large economies in the world. And during this period of time, more than 700 million people get out of poverty. And not only so, China contributed to the quick recovery of East Asian financial crisis in 1979, 1997, 1998, and also the global financial crisis of 2008. And how come other transition economies, they encounter the collapse, stagnation, and hit by crises all the time, and China was able to maintain such a remarkable growth during its transition from a planned economy to a market economy? I think the reason was before the transition, there were many, many distortions in the economy which you observe. And also, there are many, many large-scale steel enterprises in sectors which are very capital intensive, which went against China's comparative advantages. Those are the common features among all the transition economy in a socialist camp, or even in a non-socialist camp in, let's say, Latin America, in South Asia, in Africa. But unlike other transition economies, they follow the structural RP to privatize their steel enterprises, to remove all the distortion simultaneously. China adopted a pragmatic, dual-track, gradual approach. On the one hand, continue to provide necessary transition protection and subsidies to the old large-scale steel enterprises to maintain stability. But on the other hand, liberalize the entry to new sectors which were labor-intensive, which were consistent with China's comparative advantages, and which were replaced in the past. By this, China maintained stability and dynamic economic growth. And not only in terms of reform in the industrial sectors. In other sectors, for example, in the FDI, during the transition period, China prohibit the capital flow in the capital account. But China fully liberalized the trade account. And in terms of foreign direct investment, China actively encouraged foreign direct investment in sectors which China had comparative advantages. But China prohibited the investment in the old capital-intensive sectors in order to prevent competition with the state-owned sectors. And by this way, the stability and dynamic economic growth were maintained, and that's the result I just reported. But certainly, China also paid cost for this approach. The cost was the distortion created all kind of corruption and rent-seeking. At the same time, the distortion also contribute to the widening of the income disparities. And those are the issues now China need to tackle. And especially after 37 years of rapid economic growth, the economic situation in China changed. In the 1980s, 1990s, many of all the steel sectors went against China's comparative advantages because at that time China was a poor country with little capital. Now China is a high middle income country. Many of those kind of sectors went against China's comparative advantages to be consistent with China's comparative advantages. So in the past, during the transition period, protection and subsidies were necessary for the survivors of the state-owned sectors. But now today, they were consistent with China's comparative advantages. Protection and subsidies is not necessary anymore for their survival. And so the Chinese policy is to deepen the reform and to remove those kind of distortion. And as a way to implement this kind of deepening reform, which was adopted by the Chinese party in a third plenary in 2014, was to have some new initiative. One is the free trade zone initiative, started in Shanghai as a pilot. And the ideas of this free trade zone initiative is to remove the prohibition of investment. In the past, only the sector which are consistent with China's comparative advantages in light manufacturing and so on, the investment were encouraged. But in other sectors, the investment were prohibited. Now China adopted a negative list. Unless those kind of sectors are necessary for national security, otherwise any investor could make investment in those areas and receive national treatment. And also capital account will be liberalized, will allow capital to have a freely inflow or outflow. So that was the experiment started in Shanghai in 2013, and then extended to Tianjin and Guangdong and Fujian. And with this kind of pilots China gain experiences, then this fully liberalization in capital account, in investment and so on, will be extended to other parts of China. And by that, China will be a well-functioning market economy. Then related to the Belt and Road Initiative, the reason for China to propose that Belt and Road Initiative is because China currently is the second largest economy in the world, largest trading country in the world. Certainly, China need to, play a more important role in the global community and to take more responsibility in the global communities. But the way China try to play its role is not to give humanitarian aid, as in the old fashion, but try to find a way to help the other country to grow in order to reduce their poverty. And we know infrastructure constraint is the most important constraint for growth in most of the developing world. And so China take infrastructure as a leverage to propose its new ideas about global development cooperation. And this is also good for China, because if China wanted to continue its growth, China need to expand its global markets. And infrastructure connectivity is essential for market expansion. And China has some advantages to do that. The first thing is that China has the largest capacity in the construction material sectors in the world. China produces more than half of the steel, half of the cement, and half of the aluminum, and so on. And China also accumulated a lot of capacity in infrastructure engineering. The construction team in China can outcompete with the construction from any country in the world. And China also has fund to support that. As you know, that China has $3 billion of foreign reserve. In the past, most of those reserves were used to buy the U.S. Treasury bill, but now return to the U.S. Treasury bill so low. And so if the infrastructure is well constructed, the return on the infrastructure will be much higher than the Treasury bill. China has another very important advantage is that due to the rapid economic growth in China, the wage rate in China rose very quickly. And China is losing competitive advantages in the light manufacturing sectors. And China will have to relocate those light manufacturing sectors to other low-income countries. And we know that among the countries along the Belt and Road, most of them, their per capita GDP are less than one-half of China. So there will be a window of opportunity for them to grasp the window open for China for the relocation of light manufacturing. And then historically, we know any country which capture the window opportunity, they can grow dynamically for 20, 30 years and transform themselves from low income to middle income or even to high income within 1 or 2 generations. And because size of China is so large. Currently, China employs about 85 million workers in light manufacturing. Compared to Japan in the 1960s, 9.7 million. Korea in 1980, 2.3 million. Taiwan, China, 1.5 million. Hong Kong, 1 million. Singapore, 0.5 million. China this time employs 124 million workers in manufacturing sectors. And among them, 85 million are in light manufacturing. So China will have enough space for almost all the developing countries to entering into industrialization simultaneously. And if they want to capture the opportunity, certainly they need to have the infrastructure. And a One Belt, One Road initiative will facilitate them to improve the infrastructure and to grasp this window opportunity for industrialization. But let me conclude. The reason why China can be so successful is because China is pragmatic. China adopts approach according to its own conditions. And with this kind of dual track approach, China maintains stability and growing dynamically and create a condition for further deepening its market reform. And so now with the Free Trade Zone initiative, China will be a well-functioning market economy by the time of 2030, around that time. And China, the One Belt, One Road initiative will also provide other developing countries to grow as dynamically as China in the coming decades. And that should be a good news for the world, because what we need the most is growth today. Thank you.
Thank you.